Thank you. It's a pleasure. So, as I said, my name is Andrea Silvestrini. I've been working with Spotify for almost 5 years as head of operations, and before that, I had a long career in Microsoft, almost 25 years. So we could say that my entire professional life has been in the tech industry. I've been asked today to talk about podcasts, and so in the next 10-15 minutes, I'd like to essentially tell you the story about how Spotify became essentially the number one platform for podcasts. You may be familiar with Spotify as a music app, probably because you are fairly young. Most of you will use Spotify as a music app. We are, the number one music app in the world with almost 440 million users. But 4 years ago, we made a kind of risky move because we decided to enter podcast in a significant way and go head to head with Apple for this market. And back then, many people thought that this was kind of a crazy move, if you think about it, because essentially Apple created the podcast market. Podcast was invented by Apple with the launch of the iPhone in 2008, and they had, of course, the greatest market share of podcasts up to that point. And so, going after a competitor like Apple was not a slam dunk. But Spotify, nevertheless, decided to do it for a variety of reasons. The number one reason essentially was that while Apple created this market and owned that market, they were not really innovating. Apple, of course, is a super large company, very wealthy. The podcast was not, didn't have a size that was really interested for Apple. Of course, Apple is mostly a hardware company. They make most of their money from hardware. And so essentially they created this market, but then they left it on its own. They didn't really invest in it. And so Spotify thought that actually we could come in and out-innovate Apple because essentially their focus was on something else. The second reason why Spotify decided to enter the podcast was because we don't consider ourselves just a music subscription service. Spotify has the ambition to be an audio platform. And therefore, podcast was, of course, a natural tangential business that made a lot of sense for us to be in. The third reason was a reason that relate to the marginality of our business. You may not be familiar with the tech industry, but essentially the tech industry has a very high gross margin. And the reason it has a very high gross margin is because the cost to serve the marginal user is virtually zero. If you take Google or Facebook or Microsoft, let's say Microsoft, you spend 5 billion to build Windows. And the cost to serve the first user is 5 billion. But then every additional user is zero because the product is already there. In order to reproduce the product, you do it digitally, so it costs nothing. You distribute digitally, so it costs nothing. And the transaction cost is also zero. So some unique feature of tech companies, the tech industry, is really to have this very high gross margin because the cost of goods sold is fairly low. Spotify, unfortunately, does not enjoy that, despite the fact that it's considered a tech company, because essentially we pay royalty to the music industry for the music that the users listen to. And the royalty can be up to 70-75% of the revenue. And so we don't have the zero marginal cost for the user because every new user that comes to the platform and listen to the music, Spotify does pay a certain percentage of royalty. And so for Spotify, in order to improve the marginality, it was and it is important to find adjacent businesses that have a better marginality. And podcast certainly is one of those, because essentially with the podcast, you have a fixed investment to produce a podcast, and then you have this zero marginal cost to serve additional users. And last reason for Spotify to enter into this podcast business is essentially we had this theory that there could be a very positive flywheel between music and podcasts, meaning if we are able to attract new user to our platform, to our app, because of the podcast, once they are there, they're going to listen to podcasts, but then they will listen also to music. And therefore, there would be this positive reinforcement between these two business, music and podcast. So these are really the reason why about 4 years ago, Spotify decided to invest significantly in podcasts. Now, Spotify did have podcasts even before 4 years ago, but we didn't really invest significantly. We didn't really make it a core strategy for our company. So what did we do? Starting 4 years ago, we really followed and executed on three-pronged approach or strategies. One approach was essentially organic tech innovation from our R&D team. Another approach was a series of acquisitions of small company and startup that would nicely fit and complement our offering and would add value to the user. And the third approach was essentially to create originally and exclusive content that could only be listened to on our platform. And let's go through this different approach. The first one is about how we innovated on the format. If you look back at how the podcast was before we entered, it was essentially one single file that contained content and advertisement. Most of the podcasts are monetized through advertisement. There are only very few companies that have a subscription service. And so you should think of the main mechanism to monetize a podcast is really through advertisement. So the format was essentially one single file that contained both content and ads that would be downloaded and listened to by the users. The player could not differentiate between content and ads. So this was a very not sophisticated way to really manage the advertisement business. And therefore, what the vision that Spotify had was to actually dynamically inserting streaming ads into the podcast. And so this was the main innovation that Spotify brought to the market. What that means is essentially we innovated on the back end and on the front end of the business. So on the back end, essentially, we had a server that had a series of ads that could be served in real time as the user was listening to the podcast. And we innovated on the front end, on the music app, basically on the Spotify app, because the front end would recognize what is content and what is advertisement. And because of that, basically, the player would stop the content, insert in real time an advertisement, and then resume the content after the advertisement was listened to or skipped. This, of course, allowed to have ads that were constantly fresh. So if you were listening to a podcast that was 1 year old, in the prior environment, you would listen to an ad that was 1 year old. With the new innovation and technology that Spotify introduced, basically you are listening to an ad that is fresh as of today, that an advertisement paid to be served today. So this, of course, improves both the user experience and improves the advertisement satisfaction and the ability to monetize. This required a lot of technology rework, both from a front end and a back end, but increased dramatically the ability for the creator to monetize their podcast. And so that was a significant component that Spotify brought to market that is quite revolutionary. Lately, we also added a call to action. So not only we serve these ads in real time dynamically, but we also show on the app a call to action that the user can click and go to the website of the advertisement and do whatever it is that he wants to do. This new technology essentially has dramatically improved the ability to monetize the ads, and therefore has dramatically increased the amount of creator that can actually make a living through their creation, through their podcast. And so that is the organic innovation that Spotify did. When it comes to inorganic innovation, we went on an acquisition spree. And so we bought a series of companies that really complement our vision for podcasts. The first one of the most important one, was Anchor. That was a Southeast Asian company. And Anchor allows small creator to really have a great tool to create the content, to manage, distribute, host, and promote the content, to monetize that content through the Spotify advertisement network, and also to get significant insight when it comes to the ads for that podcast. And so Anchor is really a company and the product, the suite that allows really small podcaster to dramatically improve their ability to make a living by producing this content. Another acquisition that was important to us was Megaphone. Megaphone has allowed to use the Spotify streaming ads technology also for podcasts that are not created by Spotify. For instance, third-party podcasts like BBC or New York Times and so on. If they are in the Spotify audience network, which is essentially an advertisement marketplace, the advertiser can choose across a broad spectrum of offering, from music to Spotify original exclusive to third-party podcasts. And they can essentially in one shot place their ads on a variety of platform and podcasts. Last acquisition that we did was the Wooshka, which is an Aussie company, an Australian company. The Wooshka is a company that specializes in broadcast to podcast strategy, which means this company has a tool that allows radio broadcaster to easily turn their radio programming into on-demand podcasts. That is also a very neat feature, and we know that the broadcasting industry really loves this product. In addition to this, we also did acquisition in the original exclusive content. So we bought Gimlet, Parcast, and The Ringer, that were all kind of small startup that produce very interesting and unique content when it comes to podcasts. So to summarize, Spotify is now the number one platform for podcasts. So we were able to pass Apple, which is quite remarkable, considering that they invented this business and considering that they are a formidable competitor. And we were able to do that using this three-pronged approach. So organic innovation through our R&D, inorganic innovation through acquisition of a variety of companies, and investment in original and exclusive content for content that is exclusive for our partner, for our platform. With that, I would pause and I would be happy to take questions.